She thought she was pushing around a nobody, just a black janitor cleaning her wedding hall. But the moment she mocked and shoved her, the guests fell silent. Because this janitor wasn't just anyone. She was the judge assigned to legally sign the marriage. And when she walked up in her robe, jaws dropped and the bride's fairy tale day turned into a lesson she'd never forget. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if this bride already crossed the line, hit that like button. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate in Charleston, South Carolina, was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as frozen waterfalls, dripped light onto a sea of guests dressed in their finest. The air hummed with polite laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Cameras flashed, capturing the carefully constructed perfection of the day. It was a scene ripped from a magazine, a testament to wealth and status. And then the music stuttered and died. A single voice, sharp and ugly, sliced through the elegant noise, and the entire room fell into a sudden, shocked silence. Amanda Whitmore, the bride, stood near the polished dance floor, a vision in a $25,000 gown that seemed to glow under the chandeliers. But her face was twisted into a mask of pure contempt. Her fury was directed at a woman in a simple gray janitor's uniform, who was quietly mopping a small, unseen spill in a distant corner. "Are you blind?" Amanda's voice echoed in the cavernous room, each word a venomous dart. "I said stay out of sight. This is a wedding, not a subway station." The janitor, a black woman with calm, steady eyes, straightened up. She didn't flinch. She simply offered a quiet apology. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I was just cleaning up a little water." Her voice was low and even, a stark contrast to Amanda's shrill shriek. But Amanda was not interested in apologies. She was interested in power. For her, this day was a performance, and everyone, from the guests to the staff, was a prop. This particular prop was out of place. She took a step forward, her silk dress rustling aggressively. With a dramatic flick of her wrist, she shoved the heavy mop bucket. It tipped, sending a wave of dirty water sloshing across the floor, splashing near the janitor's worn shoes. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a soft, horrified sound. Guests who had been smiling moments before now stared, their expressions frozen. Some looked down at their shoes, suddenly fascinated by their own feet. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering behind their hands. It was a public humiliation, raw and brutal, and no one knew what to do. The performance had gone terribly off-script. Tina Morales, a young waitress balancing a tray of appetizers, froze in her tracks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the janitor's quiet dignity, the way she stood perfectly still as the dirty water pooled around her. She saw Amanda's triumphant sneer. It was like watching a hawk swoop down on a mouse. It felt wrong, deeply and fundamentally wrong. Ethan, the groom, finally seemed to notice the tension. He hurried over, his face pale and anxious. He placed a gentle hand on Amanda's arm. "Amanda, maybe that's enough," he began, his voice barely a whisper. Amanda shook him off, her eyes blazing. "No," she snapped, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's not enough. People like her need to know their place. This is my day, my perfect day, and she is not going to ruin it." The janitor, Mariah Carter, looked directly at Amanda. She didn't look angry or hurt. Her expression was one of quiet observation, like a scientist studying a strange specimen. She said nothing. Her silence was more powerful than any retort could have been. And then, as Amanda turned away, basking in the terrified silence of her guests, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched Mariah Carter's lips. It was a knowing smile, a smile that held a secret. It was the smile of a person who understood that Amanda Whitmore had just made the biggest mistake of her entire life. The day was far from over, and the real performance had not even begun. Amanda, emboldened by the silence that she mistook for approval, decided to press her advantage. She felt a surge of power, the intoxicating thrill of absolute control. Her wedding day was a stage, and she was the star. Everyone else was simply part of the cast, and this janitor needed to learn her lines. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the floor, her diamond ring catching the light. "And now," she declared, her voice dripping with condescension, "you will scrub this floor properly before the ceremony begins. On your hands and knees, if you have to. I want to see my reflection in it." The cruelty of the command hung in the air. Guests shifted uncomfortably on their feet. The whispers grew louder, a nervous rustle of silk and discontent. A man in a tailored tuxedo muttered to his wife, "Good heavens, is she serious?" His wife simply shook her head, her eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Ethan looked utterly lost. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, a fish gasping for air. His love for Amanda was at war with his conscience, and his conscience was losing badly. In the kitchen, Tina Morales set her tray down with a clatter. Her hands were shaking. "Did you see that?" she whispered to a fellow server, a boy named Leo. "That woman. She doesn't deserve to be treated like that. No one does." Leo just shrugged, his eyes downcast. "She's the bride. It's her day. Just keep your head down and don't make eye contact." But Tina couldn't look away. She felt a knot of anger tightening in her stomach. Frank Delgado, the wedding planner, glided over to Amanda's side. He was a man who thrived on proximity to power, and today Amanda was the sun in his universe. He wore a smug, satisfied smirk. "Excellent work, Amanda," he murmured, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. "You're showing them who's in charge. It's important to keep the help in line." His words were like gasoline on a fire. Amanda's posture straightened. She preened under his praise, her earlier anger morphing into a sense of righteous authority. Mariah Carter, meanwhile, retrieved her mop. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her expression unreadable. She dipped the mop back into the bucket and began to clean the floor, her movements methodical and precise. But her eyes were not on the floor. They were scanning the room, taking in every detail. She saw the uncomfortable glances, the averted gazes, the few who seemed to enjoy the spectacle. She saw Ethan's weakness and Frank's sycophantic grin. She was observing, she was recording. Every insult, every reaction, every person who chose to do nothing. It was all being filed away in her mind. Amanda watched her for a moment, a queen surveying her subject. She wanted one final act of dominance to seal her victory. She pulled a delicate, used napkin from a nearby table where she'd dabbed her lips moments before. She walked over to Mariah, and with a flick of her wrist, tossed it onto the freshly mopped floor. The small piece of white linen landed with a soft, insulting finality. "Pick that up too," Amanda commanded, her voice cold and flat. The room held its breath. Mariah stopped mopping. She looked at the napkin on the floor. Then she looked up at Amanda. She bent down slowly, her movements measured and unhurried. As her fingers closed around the discarded napkin, she raised her head just enough for her eyes to meet Amanda's. And then, for the second time, she smiled. It was not a smile of submission. It was a smile of profound, unsettling patience. It was the smile of someone who knew the game was rigged, but not in the way Amanda thought. Amanda felt a flicker of unease, a tiny crack in her armor of arrogance, but she pushed it away. She was the bride. She was in control. She had no idea that the woman kneeling at her feet was not just cleaning the floor. She was judging her. Hours earlier, the world looked very different for Mariah Carter. There were no crystal chandeliers or sneering brides. There was only the quiet, pre-dawn light filtering into the parking garage of her modest apartment building. She parked her reliable but unremarkable sedan 2 blocks away from the sprawling Whitmore estate, a deliberate choice to remain unseen. From the back seat, she pulled a simple garment bag. Inside, nestled in protective plastic, was a crisp black judicial robe. But that wasn't what she put on. Instead, she carefully changed into a drab gray janitor's uniform. The fabric was coarse, the fit was loose, and it smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. It was the perfect disguise. It made her invisible. To the world, Mariah Carter was a success story. A Harvard Law graduate, a respected judge in the South Carolina judicial system, a woman who had shattered glass ceilings with her intellect and integrity. She was, by any measure, a millionaire, though she lived a life of quiet modesty. But beneath the success, she carried a memory that fueled her. She remembered her mother, a woman who had worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep them afloat, coming home with her back aching and her hands raw. Her mother had often been treated as if she were part of the furniture, unseen, unheard, unimportant. That experience had forged Mariah's sense of justice. She had grown weary of the defendants who stood before her in court, their lawyers arguing for leniency. "They'd treat me different if I wore a suit, Your Honor," they would say. "The world sees the clothes, not the person." Mariah knew there was a painful truth to that. So she decided to conduct an experiment. Today's wedding was a unique opportunity. She had been assigned as the legal official, the one person whose signature was required to make the marriage binding. It was a favor for a friend of a friend, a simple civil duty. But she saw a chance to do more. She decided to arrive early, not as Judge Carter, but as a janitor, to see for herself how people behaved when they thought no one of importance was watching. What she had witnessed so far had exceeded her most cynical expectations. The raw, unfiltered prejudice from Amanda Whitmore was more blatant than anything she had seen in her courtroom. It was ugly, and it was telling. She pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping a quick message. It was to her clerk, a young, efficient man named David. He was waiting for her signal. His reply came back instantly. "Ready to arrive as the officiant, Judge?" Mariah looked across the grand ballroom at Amanda, who was now laughing with a group of friends, basking in her perceived power. A deep sense of resolve settled over Mariah. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a lesson, and class was about to be in session. She typed her reply. "Not yet. Let her dig the hole a little deeper." She put the phone away and picked up her mop. There was still work to be done, not just on the floor, but on the very soul of this perfect, polished, and profoundly rotten event. She knew that in just a few hours the janitor's uniform would come off, and the judge's robe would go on. The shift in power would be seismic, and she wanted to feel every moment of it. Mariah's mind drifted back as she methodically pushed the mop across the marble floor. She thought of her mother, Eleanor. She could see her so clearly, sitting at their small kitchen table after a long shift, soaking her tired hands in a bowl of warm water. Eleanor was a woman of quiet strength and profound wisdom. She had never had a formal education, but she understood the world in a way that many highly educated people never could. Her hands, though rough from years of scrubbing other people's floors, were gentle. Her voice, though often weary, was always kind. One evening, after a particularly hard day where her boss had accused her of stealing a cheap trinket, Eleanor had looked at a young Mariah and said something she never forgot. "The world shows its real face when it thinks you have no power, baby. People will be polite to a king, but how they treat the person sweeping the floor, that's who they really are." That single sentence became the foundation of Mariah's life. It shaped her friendships, her career, her entire moral compass. It was why she became a lawyer, to fight for the powerless. It was why she became a judge, to ensure that justice was blind to wealth and status. In her courtroom, she saw prejudice every day. It was often hidden behind polite language and legal jargon, a subtle bias masked as procedure. A lawyer might describe a wealthy defendant as a pillar of the community who made a mistake, while describing a poor defendant as a career criminal. It was the same action, viewed through 2 different lenses. Today, however, there was no mask. Amanda's prejudice was raw, naked, and on full display for everyone to see. Mariah felt a deep, resonant sadness. It wasn't just about the personal insult. It was about the confirmation of her mother's painful truth. Across the room, Amanda was holding court. She was bragging to a circle of fawning guests about their honeymoon plans. "We're flying to Paris, first class, of course," she said, her voice loud and self-satisfied. "And then we're taking a private yacht to the Greek islands. Ethan's father is footing the bill. He adores me." She laughed, a brittle, artificial sound. Meanwhile, Tina, the waitress, slipped into a quiet alcove near the kitchen. Her heart was still pounding from the earlier confrontation. She felt a powerful urge to do something, to not let this injustice simply fade into the background. On instinct, she had pulled out her phone when Amanda started her second tirade. Her hands had been shaking, but she had managed to record a short 30-second clip. Amanda's cruel command to scrub the floor. Her arrogant toss of the napkin. Tina didn't know why she did it. It felt dangerous. She could lose her job, but a stronger feeling, a sense of moral clarity, pushed her forward. This wasn't right. And maybe, just maybe, this little video could matter. She quickly saved the clip and slipped the phone back into her apron pocket. Mariah glanced at the ornate clock on the wall. The hands were ticking forward, moving inexorably toward the moment of reckoning. In 1 hour, the janitor's uniform would be gone. In 1 hour, she would step into her true role. She looked at Amanda, laughing and preening, utterly oblivious. Amanda believed she was the main character in a fairy tale. She had no idea that she was actually the villain in a morality play, and the curtain was about to rise on the final, devastating act. Mariah took a deep breath. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Today, the world had shown its real face. Soon, it would be Judge Mariah Carter's turn to show hers. After she finished mopping the last corner of the ballroom, Mariah quietly slipped away into a side hallway, seeking a moment of peace before the next phase of her plan. She leaned against the cool wall, the coarse fabric of her uniform a constant reminder of her assumed role. A moment later, a tentative voice broke the silence. "Excuse me?" Mariah turned to see Tina, the young waitress, standing there. Her face was etched with concern, her dark eyes full of a kindness that felt like a balm after Amanda's venom. I wanted to say I'm so sorry for how she treated you," Tina said, her voice soft and sincere. "That was horrible. No one should be spoken to like that." A genuine warmth spread through Mariah's chest. In a room full of people who chose silence, this one young woman had chosen compassion. Mariah offered her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot. But please, don't you worry about me." She saw the lingering anger and confusion in Tina's eyes. "People reveal who they are when they think no one's watching," Mariah added, her tone knowing and calm. It was a slight variation of her mother's old saying, but the meaning was the same. Tina nodded, but she still looked troubled. She hesitated for a moment, chewing on her lower lip as if debating whether to share a secret. Finally, she took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. I did something," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I recorded it. When she threw the napkin and told you to scrub the floor. I don't know why. I just felt like someone had to have proof of how she was acting." Mariah's expression didn't change, but inside she felt a surge of admiration. This young woman had courage. She had a spine. "Hold on to that," Mariah said, her voice firm but gentle. "You never know when it might be needed. Truth matters." Tina looked from her phone back to Mariah's face. There was a quiet authority about this woman, a sense of dignity and self-possession that seemed completely at odds with her uniform. She didn't seem like a janitor. She seemed like more. "Who are you?" Tina asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Mariah simply smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. It reached her eyes. "I'm just someone who believes people should be treated with dignity," she replied. no matter what job they have, no matter who they are. She placed a light, reassuring hand on Tina's arm. You have a good heart, Tina. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for it. With that, Mariah turned and walked back toward the service corridors, leaving Tina standing in the hallway, a sense of wonder and purpose blooming within her. The quiet exchange had solidified her resolve. Mariah's words had validated her instincts. She knew now that she wouldn't stay silent if things went too far. She had a piece of the truth in her pocket, and she was ready to use it if she had to. That short, quiet conversation had planted the seed of justice, and it was already beginning to grow. Amanda was riding a wave of pure, unadulterated arrogance. The incident with the janitor had, in her mind, cemented her status as the queen of this event. She felt powerful, untouchable. Surrounded by a group of her closest friends, she recounted the story with dramatic flair, embellishing the details to make herself sound even more commanding. You should have seen her face, Amanda boasted, taking a delicate sip of champagne. I really had to teach the staff a lesson in respect today. She let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. I honestly almost had to slap that janitor. Can you imagine? A few of her friends, sycophants who orbited her like moons around a planet, laughed along with her. Their laughter was hollow, but it was all the validation Amanda needed. It fueled her ego, making it swell to even more monstrous proportions. Frank, the wedding planner, materialized at her elbow, his smile as slick as his hair. A commanding presence, Amanda, as always, he purred. You know how to manage people. It's a gift. Amanda preened like a peacock, tilting her head back and soaking in the praise. Ethan, however, was not laughing. He stood slightly apart from the group, his champagne flute untouched. A dark cloud of shame had settled over him, and it refused to dissipate. He watched Amanda, his fiancée, the woman he was supposed to spend the rest of his life with, and for the first time, he saw a stranger. He saw a cruelty he had always known was there but had chosen to ignore. He finally found the courage to speak, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. Amanda, you went too far. That was just mean. Amanda's smile vanished. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with irritation. Oh, please, Ethan, she scoffed, dismissing his concern with a wave of her hand. She's a nobody, a janitor. Who cares? She'll be gone in an hour and we'll never see her again. Her words were a chilling dismissal of another human being's worth. To her, Mariah wasn't a person. She was a temporary inconvenience, a piece of trash to be disposed of. To prove her point, Amanda scanned the room until she spotted Mariah, who was now quietly collecting empty glasses from a service table. Amanda's face hardened into a familiar sneer. She needed another demonstration of her power, another way to put the help in their place. She called out, her voice ringing with authority. You, janitor, over here. Mariah turned, her expression neutral. Amanda pointed toward a large, clear plastic bag filled with discarded gift wrap and ribbons, which was sitting near the entrance to her bridal suite. Take that. To the dumpsters out back, she commanded. Now. The order was deliberately humiliating. She was ordering the janitor to carry trash through the main guest area, right past the entrance where she would soon make her grand appearance in her wedding dress. Several guests who overheard the exchange winced. An older woman whispered to her husband, That's excessive. The poor woman. Amanda overheard the comment. She turned her head slightly and sneered in the woman's direction. If you don't like it, you can leave, she said, her voice dripping with venom. The woman's face paled, and she quickly looked away. Mariah didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply walked over to the large bag of trash. It was surprisingly heavy. With a calm strength, she hoisted it over her shoulder and began the long, slow walk across the polished ballroom floor. Every eye was on her. She moved with the same quiet dignity she had shown all day, her back straight, her head held high. Amanda watched her go, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She believed she was untouchable. She was the bride, the center of the universe. She had absolutely no idea that the nobody she had just ordered to take out the trash held more power, more wealth, and more influence than anyone else in that entire glittering room. After depositing the bag of trash in the commercial dumpster behind the estate, Mariah did not return to the ballroom. Instead, she walked down a quiet service corridor until she found an empty office, likely belonging to the estate manager. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking softly, sealing her off from the noise and the arrogance of the party. The silence was a relief. She took a moment, breathing deeply, centering herself. The observation phase was over. It was time for action. She pulled out her phone and dialed a single number. It was her clerk, David, who answered on the first ring. "Judge Carter?" "Everything is set, David," Mariah said, her voice low and steady. The janitor was gone. The judge had returned. "We're on our way," David replied, his tone all business. "We'll arrive in 20 minutes. Do you want security present?" He already knew the protocol, but he had to ask. Mariah thought for a moment. She thought of Amanda's sneer, of Frank's enabling smirk, of Ethan's spineless silence. She thought of the uncomfortable guests who did nothing. This wasn't just about one arrogant bride. It was about a culture of disrespect that festered in places like this. The lesson needed to be clear, public, and undeniable. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "2 uniformed officers. Let's make sure this lesson is unforgettable." "Understood, Judge. See you in 20. She hung up the phone and walked over to a small, gilt-edged mirror hanging on the wall. She looked at her reflection. She saw the gray, ill-fitting uniform, the faint smudge of dust on her cheek. For the first time all day, she allowed a flicker of emotion to cross her face. It wasn't anger, it was a profound, weary disappointment. She thought of Amanda, a young woman with every advantage in the world, wealth, beauty, a loving fiancé. She could have chosen to be anything. She could have been kind. "You could have been kind," Mariah whispered to her own reflection, but the words were meant for the bride. "But you chose cruelty." That choice, Mariah knew, would have consequences. She reached behind her neck and unzipped the back of the janitor's jumpsuit. The coarse gray fabric fell away, revealing the crisp black fabric of her judicial robe underneath. She had been wearing it all along, a hidden layer of truth beneath a uniform of invisibility. She shrugged the jumpsuit off her shoulders, letting it pool around her feet. She stood straight and adjusted the robe, smoothing the front. The weight of the fabric on her shoulders felt familiar, comfortable. It felt like coming home. It was the weight of authority, of responsibility, of justice. She looked in the mirror again. The transformation was complete. Judge Mariah Carter was ready to enter her courtroom. And her courtroom for today was a wedding. The string quartet began to play the familiar triumphant notes of the wedding march. A hush fell over the guests as they rose to their feet, their faces turned toward the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Amanda stood just outside, her father on her arm, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and pride. This was her moment, the culmination of months of planning, of a lifetime of expectation. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her perfect dress, and gave her father a radiant smile. The doors swung open. She glided down the aisle, a vision of white silk and lace. Her smile was brilliant, her eyes shining. She felt the gaze of every guest upon her, a wave of adoration and envy that she soaked up like the sun. At the altar, Ethan waited, his face a mixture of nervousness and awe. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but the anxiety from earlier still lingered in the tightness around his eyes. Frank, the wedding planner, stood off to the side, beaming with proprietary pride. He gave a small, discreet signal toward a side door, the cue for the officiant to enter and begin the ceremony. The side door opened. The music swelled to a crescendo. And then a collective, audible gasp swept through the room. It was not a gasp of admiration. It was a gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. The person who stepped out was not the distinguished elderly man they had been expecting. It was the janitor. She moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, her footsteps echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. But she wasn't holding a mop and bucket. She was wearing a full-length black judicial robe. In her hands she carried not a dustpan, but a leather-bound folder filled with legal documents. The uniform of invisibility had been shed, replaced by an unmistakable symbol of power and authority. A ripple of confusion and disbelief spread through the guests. People turned to each other, their faces a canvas of bewilderment. "Is that?" a woman whispered. "It can't be," her husband whispered back. Amanda's radiant smile collapsed as if it had been struck by a hammer. Her face went slack with confusion, then tightened with dawning horror. Her eyes darted from the woman in the robe to Frank, then to Ethan, searching for an explanation. What is she doing here?" she stammered, her voice a choked, strangled sound. The fairy tale had shattered. The nightmare was just beginning. Ethan stared, his own face ashen. He had seen pictures of the judge assigned to their wedding, had briefly met her at the courthouse months ago to sign the initial paperwork. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. He leaned toward Amanda, his voice barely a whisper, filled with a terrible, sickening realization. "Amanda," he breathed. "That's not the janitor. That's Judge Mariah Carter." The same woman Amanda had mocked, humiliated, and ordered to carry trash was the one and only person in the entire state legally authorized to sign their marriage certificate. The shock that had rippled through the room now crashed like a tidal wave. Whispers turned into frantic murmurs. Cell phones, which had been put away for the ceremony, suddenly reappeared. Guests began recording, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. This was no longer a wedding, it was a public spectacle, a train wreck happening in glorious high-definition slow motion. Frank Delgado, the ever-composed wedding planner, looked as if he had seen a ghost. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, gray pallor. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His entire career was built on managing perceptions, on creating flawless illusions. This was an unmanageable reality, a catastrophe he could not control. Ethan bowed his head, a profound and searing shame washing over him. He felt the weight of every silent moment, every time he had failed to speak up, every instance he had let Amanda's cruelty go unchecked. He was complicit, and now, in front of everyone he knew, he was facing the consequences. Only one person in the room seemed unsurprised. Tina Morales, standing near the back with the other catering staff, bit her lip hard to keep from grinning. It was better than any movie. It was justice, served cold and with breathtaking precision. Amanda's face, which moments ago had been glowing with bridal radiance, was now a blotchy mess of red and white. The color had drained from her skin, leaving her looking pale and sick. "This is a joke, right?" she stammered, her voice high and trembling. She looked desperately at Ethan, then at her father in the front row. "This has to be some kind of horrible, sick joke." Judge Mariah Carter reached the altar and stood before them. Her presence filled the space, calm and absolute. She placed her leather folder on the lectern with a soft, definitive thud. "No, Mrs. Whitmore-to-be," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "This is not a joke. I am Judge Mariah Carter, and I was assigned by the state to officiate and legally sign your marriage certificate." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "I decided to arrive early, incognito, to observe the venue and ensure everything was in order." Another wave of gasps went through the crowd. Someone in the back, caught up in the sheer drama of the moment, let out a single involuntary clap before being shushed by their neighbor. The truth was now laid bare for everyone to see. The janitor had been a judge, the humiliation had been a test, and Amanda had failed spectacularly. Amanda stumbled over her words, her mind racing to find an excuse, a way out of this waking nightmare. I didn't know," she sputtered, her voice pleading. "I had no idea who you were." Mariah's eyes, which had been calm and observational all day, now held the full weight of her judicial authority. They locked onto Amanda's, and for the first time, Amanda felt true, genuine fear. "You didn't need to know who I was," Judge Carter said, her voice quiet but resonant with power. "Respect isn't reserved for titles or robes or bank accounts. It is how we treat people when we think they have none. It's a measure of our character, not their status." The judge then turned her gaze from the terrified bride to the assembled guests. The room was dead silent, every person held captive by the weight of the moment. She addressed the audience as if they were a jury. "Before I can proceed with the duties vested in me by the state of South Carolina," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "I must ask a fundamental question. Is this couple truly prepared to enter into a union built on the principles of respect, dignity, and compassion for others? Because, frankly, what I witnessed in this very room earlier today was deeply, profoundly troubling." The silence that followed was so thick it was almost physical. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye was on the altar, on the bride and groom who now stood before the judge not as a happy couple, but as defendants in the court of character. Amanda trembled, her beautiful dress suddenly feeling like a lead weight. Her perfect day had been ripped to shreds, and she had no one to blame but herself. Ethan, looking pale and shaken, cleared his throat. The sound was unnervously loud in the quiet room. He took a small step forward, away from Amanda, a symbolic distance that did not go unnoticed. He looked directly at Judge Carter, his eyes filled with a shame that was raw and genuine. "Judge Carter," he began, his voice cracking with emotion, I am ashamed. I am deeply ashamed of how she acted, of how I acted by standing by and saying nothing. We both are." It was a small act of contrition, but it was something. Amanda, seeing a tiny flicker of hope, tried to salvage the situation. She forced a watery, pathetic smile. "I didn't mean it like that," she insisted, her voice desperate. "It was the stress of the wedding. I wasn't myself. I was just so overwhelmed." Judge Carter held up a hand, gently but firmly cutting off the flow of excuses. "Stress does not create a flawed character, Ms. Whitmore," she stated, her tone now that of a judge delivering a ruling. "It reveals it." The words were a final, damning verdict on Amanda's behavior. Then, Mariah did something that no one in the room could have possibly expected. She closed the leather folder on the lectern with a quiet, final click. She looked from Amanda's tear-streaked face to Ethan's downcast one, and then out at the sea of shocked guests. "A marriage certificate is more than a piece of paper," she declared. "It is a legal and moral contract. It signifies a partnership built on mutual respect. I cannot in good conscience put my name and the seal of the state on a union that began just hours ago with such a profound act of disrespect and cruelty." She took a deep breath. "Therefore, until I am fully satisfied that this marriage is rooted in genuine respect, and not in arrogance and a sense of entitlement, I will not be signing this certificate today." The ceremony was over, but the consequences had just begun. For a moment, the hall remained in stunned silence. Then it erupted. A low murmur rippled through the guests, quickly escalating into a cacophony of disbelief, outrage, and, from a few corners, quiet approval. Guests turned to one another, their faces alive with the thrill of scandalous drama. The wedding of the year had become the fiasco of the decade. Frank, the wedding planner, finally found his voice. He rushed toward the altar, his face a mask of professional panic. "Judge, you can't do this," he protested. "This is a private event. You are overstepping your authority." Judge Carter turned her gaze on him, a look so cold and commanding that Frank stopped in his tracks. "My authority," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is to ensure that the legal requirements of marriage are met. And the foundation of that contract is mutual consent and good faith. What I saw today casts serious doubt on the character required for such a contract. Do not speak to me of my authority again." Frank wilted, stammering an apology and backing away. While the chaos unfolded inside, Tina Morales acted. She slipped out a side door and saw a small group of local reporters who had gathered outside the estate gates, hoping for a photo of the happy couple. Tina knew this was her moment. Heart pounding, she walked straight up to them. "You're not going to believe what just happened in there," she said, and pulled out her phone. She showed them the video. The clip was short, but damning. Amanda's sneering face, her cruel words, the insulting toss of the napkin. The reporter's eyes went wide. Within minutes, the clip was uploaded, tagged, and sent out into the digital ether. It spread like wildfire. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. A luxury car brand, one of the main sponsors of the extravagant wedding, saw the video on social media. They issued a public statement retracting their sponsorship, citing that Ms. Whitmore's behavior did not align with their brand's values of dignity and respect. Other sponsors quickly followed suit, not wanting to be associated with the public relations disaster. Amanda's father, a powerful and image-conscious businessman, received a call from a fellow board member. The video was already being discussed in their corporate circles. Furious and humiliated, he confronted Amanda in her bridal suite, where she had fled in tears. "You've embarrassed this entire family," he roared. "I'm cutting you off. You can pay for your own damned honeymoon." The most devastating blow, however, came from Ethan. He found Amanda sobbing amidst the ruins of her perfect day. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, ugly panic. He looked at her, and the last vestiges of his love seemed to crumble into dust. "If this is who you really are, Amanda," he said, his voice quiet and heavy with a newfound certainty, "if this is the person you become when you think you have power, then maybe we shouldn't get married at all." Amanda broke down completely. She ran from the suite, her expensive dress trailing behind her, and found Judge Carter as she was preparing to leave. She fell to her knees, a crumpled heap of silk and shame. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, "please reconsider. I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll donate to charity. Please don't ruin my life." Mariah looked down at the weeping bride, not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful pity. She remained calm, her voice gentle but firm. "Today was never about ruining your wedding, Amanda," she said. "It was about revealing who you are. Your actions today, your choices, they were all yours. You are the one who ruined this day." With that final somber lesson, Judge Carter turned and walked away, leaving Amanda alone with the wreckage of her own creation. In the weeks that followed, the story of the janitor judge became a national sensation. The video Tina recorded was played on news channels across the country. In the court of public opinion, Amanda Whitmore was found guilty. She issued a formal written public apology, but it was widely seen as a desperate attempt at damage control. The words felt hollow, crafted by a publicist rather than born from genuine remorse. Ethan, true to his word, postponed the wedding indefinitely. He moved out of the apartment he shared with Amanda and began a period of deep self-reflection, seeking therapy to understand how he had allowed himself to be complicit in her behavior for so long. The wedding was off, and their relationship was broken beyond repair. Tina Morales' life, however, changed for the better. She was asked to testify before a judicial ethics committee, not as an accuser, but as a witness to Judge Carter's unconventional methods. Tina spoke with clarity and conviction, describing the cruelty she had witnessed and the courage it had taken for Judge Carter to expose it. The committee, after a thorough review, commended the judge for her commitment to upholding the principles of dignity and respect both inside and outside her courtroom. A month later, Tina received a formal letter from the courthouse. It was a job offer. Judge Carter, impressed by her integrity and bravery, had offered her a position as a trainee clerk in her office. It was a chance for Tina to leave the service industry behind and start a new career, one where her innate sense of justice would be an asset. It was a reward for her courage, a tangible result of choosing to do the right thing when it would have been easier to do nothing. Mariah Carter returned to her courtroom, her purpose renewed. The experiment had been a painful success, a stark reminder of the hidden prejudices that still lingered just beneath the surface of society. Her story inspired hundreds of letters and emails from people all over the country. They were from custodians, waiters, receptionists, and nurses, people who felt invisible every day. They thanked her for giving them a voice, for showing the world that their work and their humanity had value. The story closes on a quiet afternoon in her chambers. Mariah looks out the window at the city below, her thoughts drifting back to that chaotic day. She thinks of Amanda, of Ethan, and of the powerful lesson that had been delivered. A quiet, knowing voice narrates her final thoughts, a reflection on the true nature of power and character. Status can be stripped away in an instant. Wealth can vanish overnight. These things are temporary. But character is who you are when you think no one is watching. It's the truth of your soul. And sometimes you learn that the mop you kick aside is held by the very hand that writes your future. Never underestimate anyone based on their appearance or their job. True power isn't always visible. It's not found in expensive dresses or fancy titles. And respect is not a privilege to be earned. It is a right that is owed to every single human being. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.